Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
So if you want to hear Avi Yemini and the rest of the interview, go to rebelnewsplus.com and subscribe. We're going to talk about Jim Jeffries. If you want to hear that, the rest of this interview, go to rebelnews.com and subscribe. And we've also got a Q&A coming up behind the paywall on rebelnews.com.
Breaking news. Our first fightthefines.com.au challenge has won. Have you seen Donald Trump? Do you think he should step in?
Donald Trump, don't trust China. China is asshole.
Should we believe anything the CCP, anything the Chinese government is telling us about coronavirus?
It is very such answer. As I mentioned, that don't trust China. China is asshole. All the people is asshole.
What gives anyone the right to tell anyone where they can and can't live?
When you import this culture, what do you think is going to happen? Australia's going to end up the same shithole that they came from, that they were escaping. Watch how Jim Jeffries has edited this last clip to make me look like an ass. See what I really said.
What gives anyone the right to tell anyone where they can and can't live? Really?
Borders,
I know borders, but wouldn't it just be nice if we got to a place in society where we had a utopia, where we all just lived as...
Well, I think if they go in jail, there must be some reason. Well,
You don't think that the communist government is a little bit dodgy?
No.
Really? The white South Africans now that are about 30 years old stole land.
No, but that's the history of the place. That's the history.
So they deserve what? A genocide? Can you sign our white South African, we want to bring in the refugees from South Africa. Are you happy?
I would prefer if the Rohingya came here first.
Why is that? Is that because they're brown?
Avi Yemini is an Australian-Israeli reporter. He's known for his work with TR News as an independent YouTuber, and of course for his work with Rebel News in Australia on fightthefines.com.au. You can find him on Twitter at AusraliAvi, Instagram, AusraliAviYemini, and he has nearly 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. And while we're here, if you want to go to the rebelnewsstore.com, you can use Andrew10 for a discount on all our new merch, including this great toque we have here. Avi, how are you? Where are you?
G'day, mate. How you doing?
Starting with the accent already, you're gonna crack me up. Are you at home in Australia? Where are you?
Yeah, I'm at home at the moment. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm having my morning coffee, getting ready to head to the gym in my gym wear.
Oh, we can't do that here. You're a lucky man. So I like to start these off by mentioning how I first came across the guest. Like so many people, I remember you from your YouTube channel and your work on TR News. My question to you is, what was the moment where you started deciding to do more journalism, more YouTube videos? I mean, I think you started with, self-defense videos online? How did you make the jump to journalism, so to speak?
Well, it wasn't self-defense videos online. I actually owned two 24-hour fighting gyms in Melbourne. When I finished my service in the Israeli army, and I guess I kind of fell into it. There was a period where Israel had gone into Gaza in one of these operations, and I remember just watching the mainstream media reporting on it here, our ABC, the Australian Broadcasting News Service, and I was watching it angrily and seeing how they were telling one side of the story, and it certainly wasn't the side of democracy and freedom. And so at the time, we had quite a large Facebook presence, and I just started from our business, which was IDF training, because it was Israeli army style self-defense. It was Krav Maga. And I remember I started posting, my thoughts on the situation on the ground as somebody who served for a number of years there in that exact location. And, it caused a little bit of controversy. I think some people did boycott our gym. Not that I cared, because at the end of the day, I thought, well, you're coming to an IDF training gym to learn Israeli Krav Maga. If you don't stand with Israel, then I don't even know why you're here. It's the principles of Israeli self-defense, which is applied in the Israeli army. It's the exact same thing. So the fight that you're learning here, and this is how I justified it to myself and others that tried to give me any kind of advice on what I should or shouldn't be doing. But after that, that whole situation ended, it sparked a lot of conversation, and I guess I found a voice, and I did start posting my political opinions on different situations or reporting different things, and I got, I guess, constructive criticism from people whom I don't even know if they aligned with my views at the time, but they just said, "We love you, Jim. I don't know if you should use your platform here where you have two good, successful gyms to push you. Maybe you should." And that's when I opened an Avi Yemini Facebook page at the time, and I started, making videos. And what is it now? It's probably 6 years later, 7 years later. I sold those gyms a couple of years ago, and it's my full-time gig. First at TR, and now at my home at Rebel News right here with you.
What was the first video you had that was completely politics that blew up? Do you remember?
Oh. The first one that blew up, probably from memory, and I don't know, I don't have the best memory on these situations. It may...
Unprofessional, Avi.
It is, they're trying to interrupt us with the group meeting. The first one that blew up from memory, my memory's not that great, so if I remember correctly, it possibly was the besides for rant. I did a lot of rants at the time to Facebook Live. That's when Facebook was kind of okay, and they didn't censor everyone. But when my first proper report was, I think at I went to one of these pro-refugee rallies, and I decided to ask them if they would sign my petition to allow the white, well, I framed it, the refugees from South Africa, which were,
I remember this,
the white farmers. And I guess that was probably the first one that really blew up from memory.
Well, the one that I wanted to... Go ahead.
Yeah.
The one that I wanted to comment and ask you about is the one that, was it Trump Jr. or who retweeted the China is asshole guy? Because that's one that crossed political lines.
Oh yeah, I think that one that was what that was the face of 2020, or at least for the first half of 2020, especially after the Wuhan virus. That one did get a. So that was one of the first times I worked with Rebel News in Hong Kong. So I was working for TR, and Ezra contacted me to see if I would go over to Hong Kong and work, TR alongside Rebel together. And that moment, I reflect on it now, because at the time, when we were filming it, I didn't think much of it. It was just a passionate guy speaking his mind, and I think it even took a month after it was just part of one of the stories we did on the ground during the Hong Kong protests, and suddenly it was picked up by everyone.
When you're in Hong Kong, I'm guessing you're not a guy who walks down the street and has fear of being beaten up in Australia or in the UK or whatever. When you're in Hong Kong, is there a different feeling? Mainland China doesn't want this place to even, they don't want them to have their own government, their own electoral system. They don't want them to have their own freedom. What's the feeling like when you're in Hong Kong, and especially a person that people know of, and they might be coming after? Were you worried you're going to get kidnapped? What's the feeling like while you're doing journalism in Hong Kong protests?
I think now it's very different now because of the new security law. I've had conversations with Ezra saying I just want to go back. I want to go back to Hong Kong. And obviously heading to Hong Kong now comes with that risk of being shipped back to mainland China in breach of that security risk. So we might have to sit on it and think of it. But back when I went, I went a couple of times. Well, the first time I went there as somebody that no one in Hong Kong really knew, just another Western reporter. What I found is that when you're there, and I think that time maybe Ken was there too at the time, or that was the second time. Can't remember. But when you walk around, it was just things were normal unless you headed to the actual protest and you kind of followed them around. It was bizarre because there were pockets of protests that were always moving, and the rest of the city was kind of functioning around that. And it's a city that, you know, it goes for into the night almost. It's almost 24/7. Then the second time you'd seen a shift towards where we are now, where the protest was more ingrained and everywhere. And it was also very different for me personally, because when I went there, I was already known by Hong Kongers as that Australian that challenged mainlanders in Australia. And some of the videos that I did for TR at the time actually were far more popular in Asia, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and places like that. So you walk down the street and you kind of, you know, you feel the sense of appreciation and love by Hong Kongers that were doing that work. But now I couldn't tell you, I really miss Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a fantastic place. It's the people are really nice. They have that gentle, respectful Asian culture, but then they also bring that Western way of thinking and democracy and love for freedom. And they, you know, it's very sad to look now and see that really coronavirus has, I think, cost the Hong Kongers this part of the fight, because the rest of the world, you know, the world, if you remember before coronavirus, the world was really focused on what was happening on the ground in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
suddenly coronavirus
and stuff were talking about it. Like it
was everywhere. Everyone was talking about it, and from the left and the right, it wasn't a partisan issue. It was everybody cared, and it was the one issue that everybody was siding with the Hong Kongers. And since then, you know, coronavirus and the election, and we're here today, and people care more about, you know, you said mean things to me rather than the arbitrary jailing of freedom-loving people on the front line in the fight against communist China. It's a really bizarre time we live in, but I guess that's why we're here.
For sure, and I could only imagine what it'd be like there now. When I talk about China versus Hong Kong, I'm reminded of another video of yours where you're interviewing some young Chinese nationals. I think they're on vacation or they're there for school, and that really got me thinking a lot about some stuff. I had just recently watched a documentary on Maoism and how that all happened in China, and I couldn't help but think that a lot of these people that you spoke to, a lot of these kids, they sound a lot like American social justice warriors. And I can't help but think or wonder, and what I'm going to ask you is China's dictatorship more an influence of the government on its people, or do you think it's possible that they developed a country full of social justice warriors that basically is almost where America is now, where they believe these facets of their culture so much, and they believe in maybe their fake issues, maybe their fake virtues that they're believing in. They believed it so much that they decide to vote in the people that agree with them. And these are people that don't particularly pay attention to politics. They don't care if there's censorship. They don't care if the government's reading everything they're saying. They just want to have TikTok, and they want to have a video platform. In your opinion, what is it that makes people in China so complicit with their government? Because there must be some degree that they know that the rest of the world sees them as kind of strange, or do they?
I think it's a mix of different things, and also you got to remember China is 1.4 billion people. The ones that come here for school or for holiday, they're not the majority. They're in the minority, and they're pretty well set up in China, and most of them would have some sort of connection to the communist government. there, whether they work for them, whether they're just got close business ties, whatever it is. So I don't think the people that I talk to here are a reflection of the majority in mainland China. I do think that there's a mix of what you're saying. There are some that probably a lot, especially within that class, that believe they're standing for what's right. They're nationalists. They believe in their country. They believe in their government as well. They believe in censorship. They truly believe in it. So that's their version of what you'd say, like the social justice warriors we have here. But I think that in China, the difference is, and what I found is that you can't actually have a rational conversation with, especially those groups, because they don't believe anything else outside of China. They've been brainwashed in China for their entire lives. Now, the ones, again, that we see here, they have pretty comfortable lives. So why would they question it? They have a comfortable life. And then on top of that, they've been fed these different narratives, which are nationalistic, Chinese, Han Chinese. So they are a very racist group. They don't like minorities. Just ask any of the Uyghurs in China. But so they have their views that have been built from childhood, from the fact that all their mainstream, all their news, all their media, all the content that they consume feeds this narrative. It supports a narrative, and if it doesn't, it's banned. So they don't really get to see opposing views, and they all have, when I talk to those ones that you're talking about, and I ask them a simple question, going, okay, which one of the 5 demands from the Hong Kongers, the Hong Kong protest movement, are you against? What don't you agree with? What don't you want to give them? And none of them could answer that, because they weren't being fed that. They were being fed one line in China, in mainland China, which was that Hong Kong protest movement was about independence. And the truth is, especially at that time, it had nothing to do with independence. The independence was a very fringe minority that were asking for independence. The 5 demands were nothing about independence. In fact, I would say, anecdotally, from speaking to Hong Kongers on the ground, they didn't want really independence from China. They enjoyed having a big brother. They identified as free Chinese. They're Chinese. They look Chinese. They eat Chinese food, but they just had Western democratic values. But they wanted that big brother. Now I think it may have changed since then, and you can't blame them, because I think a lot of people realize that the only way out of what's going on there now is through democracy, through independence.
It's hard to say where it would be at without the coronavirus. You're right. There is people. The Houston Rockets NBA team were getting in a lot of trouble for just basically bowing to them, even though their general manager said free Hong Kong, and it's still this whole firestorm that I wish we could. There's topics like that I wish we could still talk about, but right now it's just completely blown out of the water and playing second fiddle. I want to transition to fightthefines.com.au, which is how you've made us what seems to be more popular in Australia. At least you are way more famous in Australia than I am here, for example, or David Menzies or whomever is here. And what I want to ask you is, what was your most memorable case to date? The one that comes to mind for me is probably the homeless guy, where there's so many problems when people in big cities, they run into homelessness, and nobody wants to. And there's a strong contingent of people that say, don't put them in a home, don't put them in prison or anything like that. But in Australia, this homeless guy's living in his car and he's getting fined for that. What's your most memorable fightthefines.com.au case?
There's a bunch of them. They all, even the one we released a couple of days ago, which was that, that woman that was exercising and, the police literally grabbing the child from her arms, and throwing her in the back of a divvy van and like a police car. and slamming, like violently slamming her in there, you know, for $1,000 fine because she was wearing a sign that was against the lockdown. But there was a family, there was a beautiful family that we did a story on that got $10,000 in fines, and were fighting their fines. And that fine was because they lived on a border between city and rural Victoria. So at the time there was like this fake line that you were border that you were supposed to recognize, and if you crossed from one side to the other, it was a $5,000 fine. And they were two adults, and they just went to their closest health food store, which crossed that line because they live on the border, and they got $10,000 in fine. And it was just like this beautiful young family trying to, you know, survive in a time where one parent wasn't able to work, and where the government stripped them of everything, including their most basic fundamental human rights. And I remember just watching them, and they were they were just grateful that Rebel News was around and able to do something and step in where no other civil liberties group here in Australia is doing anything about it. They're hardly even talking about it. So it was exciting, and I guess for me, the whole Fight the Fines project that we've done, I'm really happy because I feel like it was almost the perfect time that I joined Rebel News, because I got that opportunity that, like you said here, it became really popular, and it empowered people to fight back. You know, each fine that we took on, and we're still doing them, each fine that we're fighting for people, just teaches others that you can do it and you don't have to worry. And just because a police officer issues you with a fine doesn't make it right, doesn't make it legal, doesn't mean you're in the wrong and you're a bad person. Same as I Will Open. That was, that's what we launched here during the lockdown in Victoria. We had the longest and harshest lockdown in the world. For months we were locked down, and we had curfews. We weren't allowed to leave our home. We were allowed out for 1 hour a day exercise. There were roadblocks. It was intense. And at some point we started the I Will Open campaign, where anyone who was going to open, who said, no, I've had enough, I was going to open, just let us know and we'll report the story. And it created this wave of industries that were opening, and I had a backlog already of businesses saying, yep, we're going to open on this date. And suddenly the government started opening things up. So I really, truly believe that more than even just protests, the way that Rebel News has been taking on these issues, at least here in Australia, has really changed the conversation. And it's moved people away from just going on the street and protesting, which is great. But we've seen some of the scenes. My first day at Rebel News, I got tackled to the ground as a journalist went at one of those protests. We were just reporting. So there was that kind of heavy-handedness at the police. But when you suddenly had small businesses rising up saying, no, I'm going to open my doors. Find me. I don't care, because either I'm going to crash or I'm going to get. When you started to have that, and it was a dominoes effect. As soon as one did it, and we reported on it, and it kind of got a bit of publicity, the next one did it, and then suddenly all these other ones were calling and doing it, and the government lost control. They weren't. What are they going to do? They weren't able to come in and do what they did. What I've seen them doing in Canada to the barbecue guy, because it got out of control. And I can understand why in Canada, the government possibly were looking at what was happening in Australia, and they go, we better stop this now at the first guy and make it not worth anyone's while to do it, because you see what happens here. As soon as you lose control, as soon as people realize that what's the worst that can happen, I'm going to lose my business anyways, I might as well go out fighting. That's what kind of happens, and the government can't control anything. And same with the fines. When people realize that a fine is just a piece of paper and you can fight it, and there's, just keep keep at it. Just do what you believe is right, and then fight the unjust fines later. And that's what we did here. So it's been great.
Avi, when people talk about lockdowns around the world, and people I know do it, and people online, of course, do it, they point to Victoria as, hey, this was a harsh lockdown, and now the numbers are gone. Did the lockdown work, and if so, at what cost?
Let me put it to you this way: if you lock everyone into their homes for 24 hours, 7 days a week, guess what? Nobody's going to get hit by a car. It works, so why don't we do that? So the question is not whether locking people down stops a virus from spreading. Obviously, if people are locked down, a virus can't spread. Now, I love when they compare Australia to Canada to North America. You know, oh, do you want to be like America? You want to be like Trump? No, it's very different. We're an island. And if you control the borders as they did here, yes, you can bring the numbers down to the figures that we've got. But I'd argue, is it still worth it? After everything that we now know, is it still worth it? And at what cost is what you say. You know, how many businesses shut down in this period? How many families? And we haven't even started to feel the pain, because even until now, the government is propping up businesses and families. When that money runs out, when that all dries up, mate, I don't think people realize what we're about to face here in Australia. It is going to be painful. And for what? For a virus that, it's not good. But it's certainly not what we originally thought it was. You know, most of my family got coronavirus overseas. Most of my family. Now, in the beginning, when they told us, I had 2 family members that had died. They told us at the time from coronavirus, or later, we don't know if it's but they were older. But the rest of my family, my age, all got coronavirus. 2 of them felt sick. There was a wedding in my family where my whole family got coronavirus. Everyone at the wedding in Miami. And only 2 felt sick, let alone anything more than that. So if you think that it's worth shutting down the entire economy for that, well, I think talk to me in a couple of years when Australia starts to really feel the pain of what we went through in the state of Victoria, when it starts to feel the pain, all the job losses, all the business closures, everything that came at that cost, and talk to me. But even if you think it's worth it, you can't compare it to North America, because you don't have the ability to control the borders like we do here. And it's interesting. It's all the people that are advocating this kind of authoritarian response to coronavirus. You know, as Australians, I can't come and visit you. Australia is the only place in the world at the moment that your passport doesn't mean very much. You can't get back into Australia. There are Australians stranded all around the world. With your passport, you cannot get back into Australia. In fact, you can't even go between state to state. So as a Victorian, I can't just go to New South Wales, which is, 1,000 kilometres down the road drive. I can't drive there. I can't drive and return. So if you think it's worth living like that, and you consider that lockdown working, like I said in the beginning, if you lock everyone in their home for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, why don't we do it like China? Why don't we start locking people up with wooden nail them into their own homes, and we'll never have disease, we'll never have anything. We'll be fine.
I think you would find people who would be for that here in the Western world. I think it's gotten so far where the hysteria has gone so wild that I think people would actually support. I mean, they're instituting jail penalties now here. Upwards of 1 year in prison now is what they're suggesting. Well, that was a great talk, Avi. We're going to move behind the paywall now for our subscription audience. So if you want to hear Avi Yemini and the rest of the interview, go to rebelnewsplus.com and subscribe. We're going to talk about Jim Jeffries. If you want to hear that, the rest of this interview, go to rebelnews.com and subscribe. And we've also got a Q&A coming up behind the paywall on rebelnews.com. Thank you for watching Andrew Says. If you want to see the full uncut version, go to rebelnewsplus.com and sign up today so you can see the entire episode where we talk about topics we can't show you on YouTube. They'll ban us.